So fellas, last night Manel Kape beat Asu Almabayev in quite a controversial manner, which we're going to get into, as well as some UFC fight announcements, some quick 5 fights to make at lightweight, and some quick 5 fights to make after the card that we just had. And we'll start off with the whole IPOC situation with Manel Kape and Asu Almabayev. So obviously last night Manel Kape beat Asu Almabayev in a pretty decent fashion, but the one thing that stands out from everything else is the whole IPOC situation, which we're having this exact conversation a week ago with Henry Cejudo and Song Yadong. So there's been a lot of controversy over the IPOCs. They've not been direct IPOCs as bad as the Cejudo and Song Yadong situation, but there were multiple times in this fight where Manel Kape was seemingly scraping the eye of Asu Almabayev, and there's been a lot of controversy online. He's been sticking his fingers out. And there's been a lot of controversy over what should happen, whether he should have been disqualified, people have said, whether they should have taken a point. My thoughts on the whole IPOC situation between Manel Kape and Asu Almabayev is that they should have deducted a point from Manel Kape, in my opinion. I don't think they should have disqualified him. That's a bit too far. But they should have at least taken 1 point from Manel Kape in that fight. I did an entire video on the biggest problems in the UFC literally a day before the card, and one of the problems were the IPOCs, where I recommended that the UFC need to start taking points, and while they're at it, you know, cut the ego, just bring back the pride gloves. They were the best gloves when it comes to MMA for everything well-rounded. But either way, I think they should have taken away a point from Manel Kape in that fight, because there were multiple times in that fight where he did kind of scrape and kind of gouge the eye of Asu Almabayev, which definitely would have given him an advantage during the fight. But I've heard a lot of people saying that Manel Kape shouldn't be rewarded for that. People saying, like I said, he should have to fight down the rankings, or he shouldn't be given a top opponent, and maybe even be rescheduled to fight Brandon Royval. And I've got to disagree. You know, you've got to blame the ref in this situation. If you're Manel Kape, fair enough, you might think it's morally, you know, unethical. It's not a good thing to do from a moral perspective. But at the end of the day, it's the referee's job to punish Manel Kape. It's the referee's job to have a DQ him or take away the points. You can't, you know, you can't blame Manel Kape. He's just doing his job, and the referee's letting him get away with it. And on top of that, he did look good in the fight. Take away the eye pokes, which I know is a big, you know, thing to take away and just let aside, but he did look good in the fight. He was piecing up Asu Almabayev. Almabayev couldn't take him down, then eventually he was sprinting away from him, and he got the finish. And it was looking like, even without the eye pokes, I know it's a bit of a theoretical thing to say, but he was looking good in that fight. So I thought there should have been a point taken away from Manel Kape, but I don't want it to overwrite the performance of Manel Kape. I still think he should be given a big fight in the flyweight division, which I'm going to get into later on in this video. And I thought it was still a good performance against Asu Almabayev, but that's that. Anyway, some more fight announcements at the UFC, or well, actually, we're going to start off with GFL. There's been a big fight announcement that's been taking a lot of, you know, heat by the MMA fans recently, with Tony Ferguson versus Dylan Dennis in GFL. If you'd have told me a year ago from now, or just any time in the past couple of years in MMA, that we would have been seeing Tony Ferguson go against Dylan Dennis in a mixed martial arts competition, I would have told you that, you know, you need to sort your head out. What are you on about? But yeah, this fight has now been confirmed for GFL. Well, I say confirmed. I don't know how trustworthy GFL is, but this is such a weird fight. Tony Ferguson on his losing streak getting taken away from the UFC against Dylan Dennis, who's this big combat sports personality, but he's barely fought, and he's lost. I swear he's lost most of his fights too. I'm going to tune into this fight. It's kind of just a weird fantasy fight that's actually going down. And you know what? Maybe this is a bit of a disrespectful thing to say, but I still don't even know if I trust Tony Ferguson in this situation. I hope he does win, and I think he will win, because he's just come from the UFC, and it wasn't even like Dylan Dennis had a really good resume in Bellator. I mean, the guy just got outboxed by Logan Paul. But I think this could be the fight where we see Tony Ferguson get back in the winning column. I know it's not the same because it's not in the UFC and it's not against a high-level opponent, but if Tony Ferguson breaks his losing streak by beating Dylan Dennis, I'm sure a lot of combat sports fans would be appreciative. And if Dylan Dennis can beat Tony Ferguson, then washed would be an understatement for Tony Ferguson. But that's kind of like a weird fantasy fight that's now been announced for GFL. Anyway, some UFC fight announcements. Bo Nickel versus Rainy Derrida has been scheduled for, I don't know what card it's on, but I think it's on May the 3rd, 2025, probably on the main card of a pay-per-view. We're going to be seeing Rainy Derrida and Bo Nickel. I love this fight. You've got Bo Nickel, who comes from this big wrestling background and so far has dominated most of the opponents that he's been put, well, maybe not Paul Craig, but apart from Paul Craig, has kind of ran through most of the opponents put in front of him with the wrestling, and he's now been this big prospect that the UFC been shoving down our throats. Taking on Rainy Derrida, the former double champion in ONE FC, big jiu-jitsu base, and he's submitted both of his opponents in the UFC with GM3, who's a good grappler, and easily submitted Kevin Holland at UFC 311 as well. So I like this fight. This is by far the biggest fight for Bo Nickel. We're not giving him somebody like Michel Pereira where it's an easy win, and a lot of people have been picking Rainy Derrida to win this fight. And you know what? I don't even blame them for that, because Rainy Derrida is a very tricky matchup for Bo Nickel. We've also got Sergey Spivak taking on Shamil Gaziev in the heavyweight division. Yeah, this has now been announced for UFC Qatar. Obviously, I did a video the other day where I talked about that card, and this is now a fight that's been announced for it. I like this fight as well. Sergey Spivak versus Shamil Gaziev. Now, Shamil Gaziev is back in the top 10 less than or just over a year after he had the other top 10 opportunity against Rosenstrike, and he's now taking on Sergey Spivak. Decent step up for Shamil Gaziev because Spivak's weird. It feels like with Sergey Spivak, he can almost beat the blobs. Every time you put him against a blob, he kind of passes the test, but you put him against any semi-athletic heavyweight and he falls short. I'm going to go with Shamil to win this fight, but I don't know how confident I am because Spivak's, you know, he's got that good pressure boxing style. He's got really good judo, and he was looking good against Jelton Almeida as well. So this is a tough fight for Shamil Gaziev, but I also think it's somewhat winnable for him. Anyway, other fight announcements that we're going to get into that maybe aren't the big fight announcements. We've got Daniel Marcos taking on Montel Jackson. That's going to be a banger of a fight for the lightweight division. And we've got Zachary Reese taking on Todorovic. Zachary Reese just got destroyed by Bekayev. Todorovic just got destroyed by Mansour Abdul-Malik. It's just a low-level middleweight fight. But anyway, we need to get into some quick fire fights to make in the lightweight division. Lightweights right now, there's been a big talk, obviously, with this whole Fiziev-Gaethje situation and Topuria moving up. So we're going to be talking about the lightweight division and some fights to make quick fire. Starting off with a title picture, Makhachev versus Topuria. I don't care about anyone saying that Topuria needs to go and fight Dustin Poirier. Just give him the damn title shot. It isn't even like he's holding up the featherweight division because he's vacated it. It's the biggest fight you can make in the UFC right now. So I think we need to make the fight. Everybody wants to see it. I don't know why you wouldn't want to see it. Why are we wasting time? He's the featherweight champion. He's moved up, given the title opportunity. It's the biggest fight in MMA. Let's get it done. And it's a #1 contender fight. Reschedule it. Charles Oliveira versus Sarukian. Sarukian was the #1 contender. Pulled out last minute, which the UFC hated him for. I don't think we punish him too badly. Let's just give him another fight with Charles Oliveira, who is now coming off a win over Michael Chandler. It's a good fight. We've seen the first fight. Very competitive. Some people thought Oliveira won. Make it 5 rounds. Oliveira Sarukian. Dustin Poirier versus Max Holloway. Lightweight division is known for being a fight that has the perfect mix of that entertaining stand and bang factor, but also being high level, and this is exactly that. Both of these guys coming off losses. Both of these guys kicked off 2024 with a bang with 2 massive knockouts. They've fought before at featherweight and obviously at lightweight before as well, but give them a full training camp. Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier might be one of the best and the most exciting retirement fights you can possibly make for Dustin Poirier. And then I think we do Renato Moicano versus Beneil Dariush. This was scheduled for UFC 311. Obviously, Moicano lost to Makhachev, but he lost to Makhachev at the end of the day. I think it makes sense to reschedule them. 2 guys who were kind of not top 5 worthy of the UFC, but still managed to make it into the top 10. So I think Moicano versus Dariush, I'm actually intrigued in this matchup, and obviously I don't want to punish Dariush for pulling out when he didn't even pull out, to be fair. The UFC forced him to pull out, so that obviously Moicano could fight Makhachev. I like that fight. Let's book it. And then I think the winner of that fight should take on Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker, he's in the top 5. He got a good nod over Mateusz Gamrot, made it into the top 5 or top 6, I think he is now. And I think for his comeback, he should fight the winner of Dariush and Moicano, who I think would have deserved the top 5 opportunity. And I think if Dan Hooker can get past the winner of Moicano and Dariush, then we give him a #1 contender fight. And likewise, if let's say Dariush beats Moicano and then goes and beats Hooker, let's give Dariush a #1 contender fight. I think that's a good, fair mix. And to be honest, I don't even know who I'd pick to win out of all the 3 of them. I probably lean towards Hooker winning them all, but it isn't like Hooker was super dominant previous to the fight with Gamrot. Anyway, let's do Gamrot versus Grant Dawson. I love this fight from a grappler's perspective. If you're a fan of wrestling, you're a fan of high-level grappling matchups with also a bit of entertainment factor, I think this is the fight to you. Grant Dawson versus Mateusz Gamrot. Mateusz Gamrot's definitely one of the best wrestlers in this division. Maybe not Makhachev level, but he's still a really good wrestler, and he's just come off a fight of the year contender over Dan Hooker, which he lost. Grant Dawson, I think he's got like a record of like 12-1 in the UFC. It's crazy how many fights he's won in the UFC. He's taken down every single opponent apart from Bobby Green. He's just made it into the rankings after beating Diego Ferreira, and I think we give him a step up in competition against Gamrot. I just love this fight from a wrestler's perspective. It's going to be a really, I expect it to be a really high-level grappling match, or maybe it cancels out and ends up being a striking match, but I think that makes sense. And then we do Benoit Saint-Denis versus Freziam, French on French violence. Maybe you do a UFC Paris Fight Night main event, Benoit Saint-Denis versus Freziam, but yeah, I think this fight makes sense. I know Yoel Alvarez deserves a shot at the rankings. I think Yoel Alvarez deserves somebody ranked above Benoit Saint-Denis. And Freziam, let's get him in the top 15. He's done more than enough to earn it. He just beat Mike Davis. Give him Benoit Saint-Denis, who's one of the most undeserving ranked fighters in the UFC, because I think Freziam is the better Frenchman at 155. So I think we should book that fight too. And then some quick fight fights to make after UFC Vegas. Let's do Manel Kape versus Kai Kara France. Now, I did say in the breakdown that I thought he should get a title shot. I think maybe not a title shot, but I think he should fight Kai Kara France. Whilst in the meantime, listen, I'm not going to say this fight again, but Pantoja versus Merab. It needs to happen, man. Pantoja's the most deserving champion out of all the other champions, and I think he should be able to move up a weight class and take on Merab, whilst both of their divisions get cleared out, because then we can make the number 1 contender fight between Kai France and Manel Kape. We can also do Sean O'Malley versus PTN number 2 in the bantamweight division to get a solid bantamweight contender. But I just feel like this fight makes a lot of sense. Both of these guys are about a fight away from a title shot, and just imagine the build-up. We saw the build-up to the first scheduled fight. I think they are probably, it's probably unironically one of the biggest rivalries in the UFC right now. They'd sell the fight. It'd be a huge fight. It's a super competitive fight too. 2 powerful strikers with good takedown defense. Both stylistic nightmares for Pantoja for an interim belt, while Pantoja faces Merab. Manel Kape, Kai France, winner gets a title shot. I think is one of the most exciting flyweight fights you can make. And then I think you do Asu Almabayev versus Andre Lima. Andre Lima is probably one of the best unranked guys in the flyweight division. It's between him and Rafael Estevam, and I think also obviously Asu Almabayev is going to need to fight down. So I think Asu Almabayev, Andre Lima could be a good fight. And then I think we do Nasrat Haqparast versus Mateusz Rebecki. I know a lot of people, including himself, have said that Nasrat Haqparast deserves a ranking spot in the 155 division. He's already lost to Dan Hooker. He's already lost to Bobby Green. And the reason I'm not going to give him a ranked fighter and I'm giving him Rebecki is because the queue at 155 is so big. You've got the likes of, like I said before, Fares Ziam. You've got Yoel Alvarez. You've got Rebecki. You've got so many big names outside of the 155 division. You have to really make a statement to make sure that you want to be ranked in this division. But I feel like Nasrat Haqparast versus Rebecki would be such a good fight. Rebecki just had a fight of the year contender against Mitabek Orobai. Nasrat Haqparast just had a fight of the year contender against Esteban Ribovics. This would be an absolute banger. It will be a striking spectacle. Honestly, another fight of the year contender fight, and the winner can get a ranking spot, or at least closer to the rankings in the lightweight division. And I think Esteban Ribovics versus Michael Johnson would be a good fight too. Ribovics is the human highlight reel. I'm sorry, Justin Gaethje, but I'm now going to have to give it to Ribovics. And Michael Johnson is on a 2-fight winning streak. He just got a really good knockout at UFC Tampa. So I think Esteban Ribovics, Michael Johnson, no way that fight goes the distance, and if it does, it's going to be an absolute scrap. I think will be 2 good fights to make at 155. And then I think we do Mario Pinto versus Taito Ivarza. I don't want to hear anyone say that Mario Pinto doesn't deserve a top 15 opponent and he's going to have to face somebody unranked in the heavyweight division. Listen, Pinto probably beats Tuivasa. We're at that stage in the heavyweight division where Pinto, this excited heavyweight prospect, let's waste no time. He probably beats Tuivasa and gets an easy road to the top 10 of the heavyweight division. We just saw it with Talishan Teixeira. He beats Justin Tafa and now is in the top 15. Let's do it for Mario Pinto. I'm not saying he deserves to be ranked, but let's give him Taito Ivarza. I think he'd beat Tuivasa, and there you go. You've got a new prospect in the heavyweight division who's actually got KO power and technique. And for Tuivasa, if he can pull this one off over Mario Pinto, which I don't think he will, but if he can, then he's back in the winning column. You know, he's finally back in the winning column, breaking his 5-fight losing streak. But I think Pinto should win this fight. He's better than Tuivasa literally everywhere the fight goes. What's the point in wasting him and potentially risking his career against somebody like Martin Badai or Kenny Dinezakuku? Give him Tuivasa, get him in the top 10. And for Austin Lane, if he's not going to be cut from the UFC, let's do kind of like one of those retirement matches that you used to see back in the day in WWE between Austin Lane and Junior Tafa. Loser gets cut from the UFC. I'm surprised Junior Tafa's still in the UFC. Wouldn't surprise me if Austin Lane gets cut by Tuesday. So Austin Lane, Junior Tafa, let's book that fight. I also think we do Haider Emil versus Dan Ige. I know Chepe Mariscal, who's also on this card, called for a featherweight rankings, and I'm going to get onto him as well. But I think Haider Emil versus Dan Ige into the fight to make. He just beat William Gomez, who most would have considered the best unranked featherweight. He's on a winning streak in the UFC. He's undefeated at 11-0. Let's give him Dan Ige. I think this would be a really fun fight on the feet because they both just bring it. They're both pressure strikers with heavy hands. I'd probably lean towards Dan Ige winning this by some sort of finish, but either way, Haider Emil, get him a ranked opponent in the top 15, and I think Dan Ige, who has lost a lot of his recent fights, would be the perfect opponent. For William Gomez, let's give him Doo Ho Choi. Doo Ho Choi returned to the UFC with 2 massive performances in his most recent fight at UFC 310. He absolutely beat the brakes off Nate Landwehr, looking amazing, and I think him versus William Gomez would be another really fun striking matchup. William Gomez, Doo Ho Choi, Haider Emil, Dan Ige, let's get those fights made. And then I think we do Cody Brundage in the co-main event. He just beat Julian Marquez. He beat Julian Marquez, but it's not like a statement-making win. Let's give him Paul Craig. Paul Craig's a weird middleweight because you might look at this fight and think, oh my god, Cody Brundage beats Julian Marquez. Now you want to see him against Paul Craig. Isn't that a bit of a step up? But I'd probably favour Cody Brundage to win this fight. Paul Craig, he doesn't improve at all. He's got a decent body kick. I think from maybe a technical striking point of view, he might be better than Cody Brundage, and obviously he's got the big Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu threat. But he hasn't got wrestling. He leaves his chin wide up in the air. He's an awful striker. I think Cody Brundage could win this fight, but I also think it's a step up in competition simultaneously. So I'm actually kind of intrigued with this fight. Brundage, Craig, get this fight done at some point, and obviously Julian Marquez is going to be cut from the UFC. And then for Chepe Mariscal, he is, I think, on a 6 or 5 fight winning streak in the UFC. How this dude isn't being talked about more, I don't know. And how this guy hasn't got a shot at the rankings yet, I don't know. But Calvin Kattar, similar to Danny Ige, has lost the vast majority of his recent fights. He just lost to Yusuf Zalal. Chepe Mariscal versus Calvin Kattar. Again, 2 precious strikers. And Chepe Mariscal might be one of my favourite strikers to watch right now in the featherweight division. Him versus Calvin Kattar would be a banger. Get him in the rankings. He's more than done enough to earn it now. Mariscal, Calvin Kattar, let's get it done. But those are the things to talk about this weekend. We've obviously got Manel Kape with the IPOC situation, which I discussed. We had a couple of fight announcements and a couple of fights that I think the UFC should make. But let me know your thoughts on this sort of like concept of video and the whole Manel Kape situation and a couple of the fight announcements. Thank you for watching.